This video is brought to you by Skillshare, with thousands of classes in design, business, and more. Skillshare is giving away 2 free months of premium membership to help you explore your creativity. If you click the link in the description box below, that's for the first 500 people only, by the way. More on them in a bit. As a marshal, Wild Bill Hickok took a hands-off approach. He spent most of his day gambling in the saloon, and his deputies knew where to find him if they needed him. And even though he policed some of the most lawless towns in the West, this technique worked more often than not. Even back then, his name and reputation were enough to make other gunslingers think twice about causing trouble in the town where Wild Bill was the law. A lot of the legends and mystique surrounding Hickok was created by magazines, Harper's Monthly in particular. But there was a time when Hickok might genuinely have been the most dangerous gunman in the Old West. His list of victims included a lot of violent men and one bear, but we'll get to that in a minute. The tales about him may have been exaggerated to an insane degree, and yet the real stories about Wild Bill Hickok were still full of mayhem, murder, and adventure. He was born James Butler Hickok on May 27, 1837, in a little town called Homer, Illinois, which has since been renamed to Troy Grove. He came from a big family and had 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and his parents were William Alonzo Hickok and Polly Butler. If young James had a sense of justice and bravery, they were likely instilled in him by his father, who was a staunch abolitionist and even worked with the Underground Railroad to smuggle slaves out of the South. In later stories, Wild Bill claims that sometimes he would accompany his father on smuggle runs and had his fair share of close calls with the law. On May 5, 1852, William Hickok died, although it's unclear if it was related to his abolitionist activities or not. James and his 3 older brothers now had to take care of the farm and the family. From his early teens, Hickok proved himself quite proficient with guns. As a teenager, he would often go hunting to provide food for the family. James found his first job as a drover on the Illinois and Michigan Canal, but soon enough he headed westward to look for better opportunities. This will be a recurring theme in Hickok's life, as the man never seemed to settle down in one place for very long. According to some versions of the story, Hickok left because he had to, not because he wanted to, after getting into a fight with another drover named Charles Hudson. Hudson was a bully who often targeted the younger James for his practical jokes. One day, Hickok had had enough, and the two began wrestling and ended up in the canal. When James emerged, his opponent was still in the water and did not appear to be breathing. Fearing that he had killed him, Hickok ran away from the scene and fled the state, although he later discovered that Hudson had survived the encounter. It didn't matter anyway, as he soon found something more to his liking. Hickok ended up in Kansas during the brief 7-year period between 1854 and 1861, when it had been incorporated as a territory but had not yet become a state. This period is generally known as Bleeding Kansas because it was marked by violent confrontations between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups, since that was the hot-button issue for the soon-to-be state. Unsurprisingly, Hickok was on the anti-slavery side. He joined up with a militia led by future Union General Jim Lane, which was called the Free State Army, but became better known as the Jayhawkers. Allegedly, it was during this time that James saved the life of a boy no older than 11 or 12 years old by the name of William Cody. He would grow up to be Buffalo Bill. Hickok's reputation as a gunfighter slowly began to build. He served as a constable for Monticello Township for a while before accepting a position with the Russell Majors and Waddell Freight Company, best known as the parent company of the Pony Express mail service. It was at this time that the legend of Wild Bill Hickok almost ended before it got started, when the gunfighter was mauled by a bear. Some versions of this story, including Hickok's own account, said that the stagecoach ran into a cinnamon bear blocking the road. Hickok got out and shot it, but failed to kill the animal, and a fight ensued. Another, less courageous telling asserts that Hickok's party was sleeping in the wild, and the bear simply stumbled onto their camp and attacked Wild Bill. Both stories ended the same way, though. Hickok managed to kill the bear with his knife, but not before it did some serious damage. Bill had to recuperate for months, and afterwards he was sent to Rock Creek Station. So we arrive at perhaps the most controversial episode from Wild Bill's life, one that could potentially change the perception of Hickok from gunfighter to cold-blooded murderer. Rock Creek Station, as its name implies, was a station for the Pony Express and regular stagecoaches in the southeastern part of the Nebraska Territory. It was built on land that used to be owned by a man called David McCannells, who sold his property to the freight company in installments. If we go by the popular version of the story, McCannells was also an outlaw who led his own gang responsible for robberies, cattle rustling, and even murder. At one point, the company was struggling financially and failed to pay an installment on time. On July the 12th, 1861, McCannells and two henchmen, James Woods and James Gordon, went to the station to get the money he was owed. There, he found the station manager, Horace Wellman, and his two employees, a man called Brink and Hickok, who worked there as a stock tender. Also present was McCannell's 12-year-old son, Monroe. It's impossible to tell with any certainty what the exact circumstances were. Some say McCannells became verbally abusive towards the station employees, or that he forced his way inside to look for money, or that he pulled out a gun. Others say that McCannells and his men were unarmed and that Wellman came out with a shotgun, or that Hickok opened fire without provocation. Because Wild Bill became a Western icon, the version that made him look like a hero was the one that was circulated the most. Either way, the meeting turned into a confrontation which turned into a gunfight. Soon enough, McCannells had been shot dead and both his men were fatally injured. Nobody on the other side sustained any serious injuries. We don't know for sure who shot who. Hickok usually gets the credit for killing McCannells, although some versions say it was Wellman. Both men, plus Brink, were charged with 3 murders, but were acquitted on the basis of self-defense and defense of company property. Interestingly, Monroe McCannells always sustained that his father and his 2 men were not armed and were gunned down in cold blood, but he was not allowed to testify at the trial due to his age. And here's an interesting bit of trivia for you. David McCannells might have been dead, but his legacy continued on to great success. His descendants changed their names to the McCandles and later included 2 decorated war heroes, as well as Captain Bruce McCandles II, the astronaut who performed the first untethered spaceflight in history. After the episode at Rock Creek Station concluded, Hickok enlisted in the Union Army in the Civil War. He first served as a tea master and a wagon master. Afterwards, Bill joined up with an old acquaintance of his, General Jim Lane, former leader of the Jayhawkers, who was now in command of the Kansas Brigade. At this point, Hickok also reunited with an old friend of his, Buffalo Bill Cody, who was working as a scout. Hickok wore many hats during the war, going where he was needed. He served as a scout, a spy, and a sharpshooter, among other things, and distinguished himself at the Battle of Pea Ridge, Arkansas. This might be the time when Hickok got his Wild Bill moniker. As arguably the most famous nickname of the Old West, many historians have wondered why James Butler Hickok became known as Wild Bill. Multiple sources agree that the gunfighter obtained the moniker during the war for his daring but reckless ways, but the exact origins are still up for debate. Also uncertain is why he would be called Bill in the first place, since his name was actually James. According to documents of that era, for a time he went by the name William Haycock, so that could be an explanation. Another possible alternative was that Bill wasn't originally short for William, but rather Bill as in the beak of a bird. Before he was known as Wild Bill, he was sometimes called Duck Bill because he had a long, sharp nose and a protruding upper lip. We know this for certain because he is referred to as Duck Bill in the court documents for the McCannells trial. Hickok, unsurprisingly, absolutely hated this nickname. He grew out his moustache to cover up his lip, and it is feasible that he started going by William just so he'd have another reason to be called Bill. And look, you might not need to train as some sort of sharpshooter for an upcoming war, but there are other skills that you could build, and that leads me to today's sponsor, Skillshare, an online learning platform. Unlike some websites where you have to pay for individual classes, with a premium membership from Skillshare, you get unlimited access to classes, so you can take as many as you want. This is pretty nice. Now, I'm someone who'll just jump into a particular part of a long class. I'll look at that table of contents and I'll be like, there it is, part 13, that's what I want to know. I'll just go have a look at that. So sites where you have to pay for an individual course just to get that one piece that you want, that's not great for someone who learns like I do, and that's why I like Skillshare. I've talked about some classes I've taken before, and I'd still recommend those. There's the email productivity class from Alexandra Samuel, which really got my inbox that was a disaster sorted out. Or there's another course about generally building good habits with Thomas Frank. Both of those are great and worth checking out. Anyway, join more than 7 million creators learning with Skillshare. Skillshare is giving away 2 months of premium membership to help you explore your creativity. Just click the link in the description box below, and that's for the first 500 people only. After that, it's also super affordable at only around $10 a month. So, like I say, 2 months for free. If you're one of the first 500, click the link in the description box below, and let's get back to the video. The event that turned James Butler Hickok into Wild Bill Hickok, Legend of the Wild West, occurred soon after the man arrived in Springfield, Missouri following the Civil War. If you've ever seen a quick-draw duel between two men in a Western movie, it's because of what happened here, because they certainly were not actually common in the real West. Hickok quickly developed an antagonistic relationship with another fellow gambler named Davis Tutt, a former Confederate soldier. According to some acquaintances, the two men may have been friends at first, despite the fact that they served on opposite sides of the Civil War. Whatever dispute came between them, we don't know. Some say it may have been a woman, but it caused plenty of bad blood between the two gamblers. Some sources mention that Hickok refused to play cards at the same table as Tutt, so the latter started loaning money to other gamblers and giving them tips on how to beat Wild Bill. Things weren't going in Tutt's favor on the afternoon of July the 20th, 1865. In fact, Hickok had won around $200 of his money. To try and put him off his game, Tutt began taunting the gambler, reminding Hickok that he owed him $40 from a horse trade. According to witnesses, Wild Bill agreed and settled the debt right then and there, but this wasn't enough for Tutt. He then said Bill owed him another $35 from a different transaction. Hickok disputed this claim, mentioning that according to his notes, he only owed $25, which he offered to pay. As you might imagine, because Tutt regularly gave out loans to gamblers in need, he was a pretty popular guy. In fact, a lot of his friends were there that night and they all had guns. Sensing that he had the upper hand, Tutt decided to get cocky. He walked up to Hickok's card table and snatched his Waltham gold pocket watch right in front of everybody. He then loudly proclaimed that he will keep it as collateral until he got the other $10. Obviously, Wild Bill was furious, but there was little he could do as he was completely outgunned. But the situation had other serious consequences for him, other than just a public humiliation. At that point, his primary occupation was gambling, and he could not afford to develop a reputation as someone who was unwilling or unable to settle his debts because nobody would want to play against him anymore. So Hickok allowed Tutt to walk away with his watch, but warned him not to wear it in public. Looking back at this is where Tutt probably should have called it a day and quit while he was ahead. It is unclear if he ever said this on the spot or conveyed the message to Bill later through his associates, but word soon began to spread that Tutt was planning to stroll through the town square the next day, proudly showing off his shiny new watch. Hickok replied that he would do this if dead men can walk. At this point, Tutt was backed into a corner. We can only speculate on his ideal outcome of the matter. Did he actually want to goad Wild Bill into a gunfight, or did he simply want to humiliate him as much as possible? Whatever his intentions were, he pushed too far. Everyone in Springfield knew what he did and what he bragged that he was going to do, so if he backed off, he would have been seen as a coward. The next morning, the two men met, and according to their witness testimony, neither one was eager for a fight. They argued for a while, and eventually they went for a drink together. For a bit, it looked like the matter might be settled amicably, but their little get-together ended with Tutt storming off angrily. What they said we'll never know, but that afternoon, Tutt could be seen in front of the Springfield courthouse with Hickok's watch. Word eventually reached Wild Bill, who knew that the matter had to end one way or another. At around 6 p.m., he walked out into the town square and headed towards the courthouse and called out Tutt. Everybody else rushed off to the sides, and only the two gunslingers were left standing in the middle of the street, just like in the movies. Hickok and Tutt exchanged a few words, hesitated for a bit, but then pulled out their guns and fired at almost the exact same time. We cannot say who shot first. Some witnesses claimed Tutt shot as fast as possible, while Bill took the time to steady his aim. If this is true, then it paid off for Hickok because Tutt missed, while he hit him between the ribs, causing Tutt to collapse and die. The shot itself was incredibly impressive, which is partially why it caused a sensation. The two men were allegedly standing 75 yards apart at a time when your average revolver began losing accuracy after 25 yards. The gunfight became the stuff of legend. It turned Wild Bill Hickok into an icon of the Old West, but this didn't happen overnight. In fact, it wasn't until early 1867 that an article in Harper's New Monthly magazine about the shootout propelled Hickok to national fame. The article was written by George Ward Nichols, who honestly deserves about as much credit for creating the legend of Wild Bill as Wild Bill himself. The article was incredibly sensationalistic and was far more concerned with telling a compelling story than telling the truth. It contained several falsehoods, including, not in the least, naming the gunfighter Hitchcock instead of Hickok, but it got the job done. Nichols was also the man who sensationalized the previous shootout with David McCannels to the point where Wild Bill fought off a bloodthirsty gang of a dozen men single-handedly, armed only with a rifle and a Bowie knife. One part of the duel that you won't often see in the movies is the aftermath. Hickok had just gunned down a man in front of the entire town, so he was arrested and charged with murder. The charge was later downgraded to manslaughter, and Bill managed to post bail. His trial took place at the start of August, and after hearing from 22 eyewitnesses, the jury acquitted him. This verdict was not popular with everyone, and the jury had been accused by multiple publications of conceding to the unwritten frontier law of a fair fight instead of the government laws, which would have clearly found Hickok guilty. Now that the business with Tut was dealt with, Hickok thought about going into law enforcement. He first ran for city marshal in the same city of Springfield, but he lost the election. In 1867, he took a brief hiatus from his policing ambitions and joined the Indian Wars, serving as a scout again. Here, he worked under General George Custer, who a decade later would gain infamy for his defeat at the Battle of Little Bighorn, also known as Custer's Last Stand. Hickok made a deep impression on the general, who went on to describe him as one of the most perfect types of physical manhood I ever saw. His skill in the use of the rifle and pistol was unerring, his influence among the frontiersmen was unbounded, his word was law. General Custer reported that Wild Bill had 2 large ivory-handled revolvers, which he always carried with him, and that, at the time, Hickok was responsible for at least 6 killings in shootouts and many other injuries, yet he had always escaped untouched. In 1869, Wild Bill became the city marshal of Hays, Kansas. At the same time, he was also serving as sheriff of Ellis County after having been elected to finish the remaining term of the previous sheriff who quit. It didn't take long before Hickok began settling the law in his own way. He killed 2 men in his first month as sheriff. First was a troublemaker named Bill Mulvey, or Melvin, who got drunk and began shooting out of random windows in town, and the other was a man who got into a bar fight named Samuel Strawhan. Both men drew on Hickok, and both men lost. Another violent encounter happened in 1870 when 2 drunken cavalry troopers attacked the marshal, prompting him to return fire. One of the men had his knee shattered, while the other died of his injuries the very next day. It seems that the people of Ellis County weren't very happy with Hickok's tactics, and he lost the next election. The gunfighter moved on and became marshal in Abilene, Kansas, a city with a much wilder reputation. In fact, the previous marshal, a notable gunman in his own right named Tom Bear River Smith, had not only been killed while serving a warrant, but also decapitated. This was a city more suited to Hickok's trigger-happy disposition. In fact, soon after becoming marshal, he was involved in a saloon shootout where 2 men were killed. Afterwards, the local newspaper published an article defending the marshal, making it clear that that was the new standard procedure from then on out. It read, "There is no use in trying to override Wild Bill the Marshal. His arrangements for policing the city are complete, and attempts to kill police officers or in any way create disturbance must result in loss of life on the part of violators of the law." During this time, Wild Bill had an encounter with John Wesley Hardin. You may not have heard of Hardin. He wasn't as famous as some other contemporary outlaws like Jesse James or Billy the Kid, but he had a higher kill count. He proclaimed that he gunned down over 40 men, although other sources credited him with only 27 kills. He wasn't as prolific when he visited Abilene, although he was still an outlaw. We're not sure exactly how the event unfolded, as we don't have Hickok's side of the story, and Hardin gave differing accounts over the years. What we do know happened was that Hardin killed the man sleeping in the hotel room next to his for snoring too loud. When Wild Bill came to confront him, one of 2 things probably took place, at least according to Hardin. He either got the drop on the marshal, disarmed him, and left town, or the likelier version, he jumped out of the window dressed only in his undershirt, hid in a haystack, stole a horse, and rode away. So we never got a gunfight between Wild Bill and Hardin, but we did get one between Hickok and Phil Coe, the owner of the Bull's Head Saloon in town. We're not sure on the source of the animosity between them, but it escalated to violence, and Coe drew on Hickok during a street brawl. Hickok drew back, shot and killed Coe, but then he made the worst mistake of his life. Wild Bill noticed some sudden movement, and out of pure instinct, he shot and killed the man headed towards him. However, that man was Mike Williams, one of his friends and deputies. Unsurprisingly, Hickok was dismissed as Marshal for his legal blunder, and to our knowledge, he never killed a man again. Besides his guilt for Williams's death, he was dealing with another big problem. He was losing his vision. Some say he had glaucoma, others ophthalmia, but he would have probably gone blind if he'd have lived any longer. His gunfighting days were over. Wild Bill's last few years were unbefitting of a man once regarded as one of the greatest legends of the Old West. He was arrested for vagrancy several times. He married an older widow, who he left after just a few months. For a while, he joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, but found that he hated performing on stage and only lasted a couple of months before being fired. In 1876, Wild Bill joined a man named Charlie Utter and went prospecting for gold in Deadwood, South Dakota. On August the 2nd, he was shot in the back of the head while playing poker by a drunken gambler named Jack McCall. According to legend, he was holding the black pairs of aces and eights, which has since become known as the Dead Man's Hand. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe. Also, please do check out our fantastic sponsor, Skillshare, who are linked to below. And thank you for watching.